So my Caapi is growing pretty well, and I set up my substrate so that it's in a semi-hydroponic setup where there's the soil on the top and basically hydroponic on the bottom. And it's going to be hard to film, so I'll just film the after effects. But I'm going to trim back the roots, and I'll be doing a extraction on the roots to see the viability of using the roots as a maoi source. So usually you would use the stem, and the yield is within 0.5 to around 2% on the high end for very mature stems, but it's usually quite low. And there's some older papers where they use the leaf material, and the leaf material is generally stronger as far as the total harmalas, but it's higher in harmine rather than the THH and the harmaline. And the roots, basically in all of the papers, show the highest content, where the stem would be just around 0.5, the roots would be around 2%. In a normal cultivation style, that wouldn't be impressive, since you would have the trouble of uprooting and using everything. Like it'll be a hassle to uproot and clean the roots and everything. But with this setup, you could just trim back the excess roots. And if you do a real like deep root hydroponic where you're aerating the roots, you'll have even less problems. Recently, another channel, Floji Mimosa, I think that's the actual channel. He's a Brazilian member, and his channel is dedicated mostly on the traditional use of mimosa, and he also has some Jurema, the Caapi, and his channel is really interesting, and he has a Discord which I've joined recently, very informative, and he also reads a lot of older papers. And recently he brought up this paper that I read a few years back, and due to his recent video, I decided to just trim back my roots and finally get around to testing this. Originally, I was always a bit skeptical of the actual reports, since it's extremely rare to see the roots being used. I would always assume that it was a mistranslation, or like I don't know, the data was off by something. But I'll be testing that now. I'm not sure how much grams I have of the roots, but it should be enough to have a measurable yield. So here's the root system. There's a small amount of root rot, but I don't think that'll be a huge issue. And the water's fairly clean, since I do cover it to prevent light. So I'll be trimming it at the actual point near the plastic, and I'll just trim everything back. And I'll get around to weighing this wet and dry. Here is the root system afterwards, and I'll just place it right back in to the setup. I have a hole so that it never floods, and it'll prevent the entire plant from rotting. So unless these roots have a very high yield, I'd say the leaves are a more sustainable source for harmalas. So there's no particularly bad smell. I don't think it's actually root rot, but rather just dead roots. there isn't that musky odor that usually comes from root rot. I mean, visually it is. I think it's just dead though. So there's no particularly bad smell, but it's not exactly pleasant. You can see the strong live roots. Near the stem there's some thicker roots, and my black light is busted. I'm going to try to change the batteries, but I think it's the actual light that's depleted or dead. And yeah, I'll be weighing this and then drying it and extracting it to see how viable it is. So my black light is working. There was just a battery leak. I scrubbed the contact a bit and it's working now. So there's no noticeable change in the water used to wash. So it's hard to pick up on the camera, but you can kind of make out the brighter tone in the center of this thicker taproot. They all have this. And on my fingernail there's also a telltale sign of some harmala from squeezing it. You can make it out. So it is present. We'll just see by how much is present. So the channel I was talking about earlier is called Luz de Jurema. I think I said Luz of Mimosa or Flower of Mimosa, but it's the light of Jurema, which is the mimosa plant. He's exclusively Portuguese speaking. I do think he does understand and can reply in English, but it's mostly dedicated to Brazilian viewers. But yeah, if YouTube translation, auto translate works. So if you check out his channel, Luz of Jurema, his most recent video is on the alkaloids of the jagubi plant, which is Caapi, and he shares the paper with the studies on the alkaloid proportions in the plant. And you'll see in the paper that a majority of the alkaloids is located in the leaves and the roots. In my case, I wouldn't drink a tea from the roots in the state that they were in on mine. But if I were to do a deep root culture and I had those bubbling, those bubblers for the roots, I'm sure the roots would be much cleaner and with minimal rot. But in any case, it's just proof of concept. I always wanted to test this. I do believe I tested this in the past, but I had a minimal amount of material to do a quantitative extraction. In the past, I've also tested using leaves. I did an extraction. I also used a small amount of material, but I do know it's quite active, and it's mostly harmine versus harmaline mixture with THH in the stem. Just another experiment I did with the Caapi as well. I previously was attempting quitting or masking or chewing the leaves, trying to do it as a sublingual dosing of the harmalas, but there was a minimal amount of activation. But it seems that a sublingual dosing, it causes a much shorter duration of the MAOI effect. And just a guess before I actually do the extraction, I think the most viable option is actually harvesting the leaves and collecting them. You could just dry them until you want to use them. That seems to be the most sustainable, easiest way to get an MAOI source for your personal usage. And yeah, I believe the roots that I harvested are over a year old. I did trim the roots back a while back, but they are at least a year old. If the age actually plays a role, I have no idea. But my plant is smaller than what most would be at 2 or 3 years old, since it's not in the ground. But it is thickening up slowly. And there's some nice corking. So yeah, just a shout out to Luis of Jurema. Pretty cool channel if you understand Portuguese, or if the auto translate for the subtext or subtitles actually works for his channel. It's a pretty cool channel to check out. And while I'm suggesting other channels, I also wanted to suggest a different type of channel, just a commentary on, I guess, psychedelics and certain themes. Enigmatic, something to that extent. It's a fairly new channel, small, and it's only basically a podcast where a guy just shares his opinions and his thoughts on certain topics. My channel is pretty much exclusively just experimenting different routes and sharing updates on my cacti. But if you're interested in I guess a more philosophical topic, sometimes it may get political depending on how you want to take his stances. But yeah, just a shout out to Enigmatic, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I'll leave a link. His channel's pretty cool, and a big shout out to Luis of Jurema. Very cool channel. He shares a lot of his experience doing mimosa teas and different approaches and different end results to the actual consumption of the plant. Similar to how I don't take the jagubi, the Caapi, only for the purposes of ayahuasca, but also as a daily ritual and health benefits that I get from my daily dose of the Caapi. If you want to check that out, it's a pretty cool channel. And if you just have some random time to spare and want to listen to something different, Enigmatic is also a pretty cool channel. It's not always the easiest topics to listen to, like on a whim, since some of them are a bit deeper or darker, but I thought it was worth a shout out. Finally, my Chacrona is starting to perk up and look better. And I'm fairly excited on this Psychotria. I really want to test this, but I'm going to let it grow out a bit more. I'm going to take some time to try to make my TLC plates again. It's a bit of a pain, but I previously did a reagent test on these, but I used the whole leaf extract, and the results were completely inconclusive, since Psychotras in general are full of indoles. The result, even though it showed positive, it could be pretty much any indole. So I'll be doing my do-it-yourself TLC plates again, and based on the location of the RF value on the spots, I will hopefully have a better idea if it actually is active, since if I were to do an extraction, I would need quite a bit of leaf material. Still struggle a little bit with the appropriate watering, but overall looks much better than it did a while back.